Okay, welcome everyone to Aotearoa Conversations. This session here is about legal structures for social enterprises. This has been brought to you by Akina and the Impact Initiative. So with our facilitator today is Stephen Moe from Parry Field Lawyers. He has written and spoken numerous times on this topic. I've certainly been in the sessions with him with that, so we're in a very safe hands. I'll pass over to you, Stephen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the welcome. Kia ora koto, ko Stephen toko ingoa, no autatahi ahau. It's great to welcome you all. I always enjoy talking about legal structuring, and I hope to make this interesting for you rather than it being a dry topic that is kind of a, do I have to talk about that, you know? Because I think that there's an opportunity here. There's an opportunity represented by what social enterprise is. I'm sure you wouldn't be on this call if you didn't agree or think that there was opportunity worth exploring. So just before we get into some of the detail, as I'm talking in this intro bit, can you be thinking about the type of structure that you are now or that you're thinking of becoming if you are looking at this? And I'd be curious to find out what those are or that you're still just thinking about it. And if you can put that in the chat, that would be helpful because that will give us a sense of what people are looking at, maybe what structure you are now, what you might be looking to transition into. But before we do that, I just always like to give a brief introduction because as soon as I opened my mouth and started to speak, you heard an accent. So I just find it helpful to briefly explain that. I was born in America, but moved to New Zealand when I was 7 years old. So I actually feel like New Zealand is definitely my tūranga waiwai. This is my home where I've come from. I moved to Christchurch and grew up in Christchurch, went to school here as a young child, went to Canterbury University, and I worked in Wellington for 3 years at one of the bigger law firms called Russell McVeigh. And after Russell McVeigh, 3 years there, I met my wife in Wellington. We decided it'd be fun to go to Europe. So we moved to London and we were there for 3 years, Tokyo for 4 years, and then Sydney for 4 years. And then about 4 years ago, I decided with my wife, it's really time to move back to New Zealand, the place that we feel most at home. And the reason for that is that my children came home singing this beautiful song called the Australian National Anthem. And we thought, there's an identity forming here. So we came back, but as I came back, I completely shifted my focus from having worked in corporates, worked for banks, and have really reinvented myself into what I like to think of as a purpose-driven lawyer. So someone who wants to help people effect positive change in our society. And through that process, I got very involved with social enterprise as one outworking of that. And this will be a theme that we talk about through this session, is that it's really about what's the impact that you want to have. And social enterprise is one way to describe that. So I've been doing this for about 4 years. Specifically in the chat, I've just put a link to the book I did called Social Enterprises in New Zealand, a Legal Handbook. And that came out at the time of the Social Enterprise World Forum in 2017. That has enabled me to then meet many people who are curious about what are my options. So I guess I would encourage you to have a look. It's a free resource, it's a PDF, and some of the themes and things we're going to go through today are echoed in that book itself. So you can take your time to go through that. In the chat, I've also put a link to a report that I was one of 5 co-authors that Akina and the Impact Initiative produced last year. And that we interviewed 25 different social enterprises, talked with them about the challenges that they were facing, and basically proposed some changes to government that we think would empower and enable social enterprises to succeed. So that I can go into that if you're curious, but the link is there. It's a more than 70-page report. And it took us a long time to write. I think in my career, I'm really proud to be associated with it. It was a real honor to be part of that process of you know, analyzing what might the future look like. So it's kind of a forward-looking document. And it's with government, and we'll see what happens next. But I can answer specific questions about that if you're interested. So sorry for so much background, but I just think it's helpful for you to understand the context of where I'm coming from and why I'm here today to speak with you. Obviously, as a lawyer, I'm also doing work across the country with people setting up social enterprises. So I'm guiding them through the process right from the ideation stage through to the, okay, we're actually selling a product. And so I'm seeing, you know, right at the coalface, what are the key issues to think about? What are the major options to consider? The final little bit of intro is I do a podcast called Seeds, and I've interviewed 213 people, and the vast majority have social enterprise in some way. So that's a lot of content out there, and I'll put a link in the chat a bit later as well. So if you can put in the chat, if you're willing, you know, just type what type of entity you are, because that will help me to be able to frame my comments. I actually want this to be interesting and engaging for you. I don't want it just to be me talking and, you know, like I've given this talk a lot, so I can do the talk, you know, and talk about options and all the different ways of doing things, but I would like to make it a bit more interactive and have questions from you and be able to hopefully give you some steers and some guidance. The one qualifier there is that it's always hard to give good advice based on a 30-second summary or a one-line, here's what I want to do. So whatever you do, make sure you get good advice that goes deep, you know, and asks lots of questions. But when we come to social enterprise, I think it's really important to set the framework about what we even mean by the word social enterprise, because it's not a legally defined term. So I got an email yesterday where somebody said, how do you help social enterprise trusts? You know, like implying that you had to be a trust to be a social enterprise. And obviously that's not at all the case. Social enterprise is a very helpful term to describe a type of people or entrepreneurs who are wanting to combine profit and purpose. So they're saying, rather than the traditional business model of I'm here to generate profits for the shareholder, how can I maximize shareholder return? They're saying, I want to use the profit so that it's a sustainable business model, which means that I can deliver impact and I can achieve purpose. So the term social enterprise, it gets difficult because people use it in different ways all the time. And in New Zealand, we don't have a legal definition. Like there is no box you can tick if you set up a company that says, I'm a social enterprise within the legal world. There's no act, you know, there's a Cooperative Companies Act, there's an Incorporated Societies Act, there's a Charitable Trusts Act. There is no Social Enterprise Act. So I just want to be clear at the beginning, make sure when you're thinking about the term social enterprise, that what you're talking about is more like a movement or a way of expressing the desire to have impact, rather than it's a box and this type of entity is a social enterprise and this type is not a social enterprise. The other thing I would say about the terminology is that I'm beginning to move away from the term social enterprise, and I'm starting to use the word impact enterprise, or talking about impact organizations. And the reason is that I think social enterprise has certain implications, and people maybe would assume it's social related. So what about environmental outcomes? You know, what about cultural outcomes? What about, you know, name other outcomes? You look at the SDGs, what about these other things that maybe wouldn't neatly fit within the term social? So that's why I kind of like the more umbrella term, which is impact. And I think impact covers in a neat way what the type of people are who want to combine purpose and profit. So those are just, I just think it's good to talk about the terms before we dive into the detail. And thanks for coming in with these chats. I'll make sure to have a look through those as we continue talking. But to set the scene, like, I'm just going to assume that you all, I want to set the difficulty that you will face, so it's really clear from the beginning. And then I want to talk about some of the options. So I want to do this by saying you are at a beautiful dinner party. And at the dinner party, you're sitting next to someone on your left and someone on your right. You turn to the person on your left and you say, "What do you do?" Right? What's our opening question? Well, what's your name? What do you do? And they say, "I am interested in working with people who have physical disabilities or something that means that it's difficult for them to adapt to society." And you are talking with them. Immediately, your mind probably is jumping to charity. How are you going to get funding for this? What sort of grants are available to help this specific cohort of people? And you can insert any group that you want there. You know, it could be rehabilitation from drugs, or coming out of prison, prisoners, employment, could be other, literally acting from matters of the heart. They want to help through charity. And if that's the case, then you're probably thinking, you need to
I'm not sure if anyone else is getting, oh, okay, there's a few ahead. Stephen, if you can hear me, there's, we're just, myself included, we're getting up and down reception from you in terms of the audio. So I'm just gonna see if you come back to us. Otherwise, what I will do is I will ask everyone just to, I'll ask, oh yeah, I thought that would happen. We'll just keep each other company until Stephen comes back. Thank you, everyone.
Just to clarify and fill the space while we're waiting for Stephen. So on my comment, yeah, legal structure can determine what kind of funding you can get from government. So for example, the government has business advice for COVID-19. It's only available for registered businesses through the Regional Business Partnerships Network. So charities can't actually access that funding. So yeah, legal structure can make a difference on what kind of funding you can get.
Also applies from a raising capital point of view as well. So Modbus previously I was with PeachMe, so the legal structure is very critical if you say wanted to bring on shareholders. So there's only very specific legal entities that can actually do that. Stephen, just testing again. Just try your audio if you could, please, Stephen.
Yep. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Can I just get a few nods as well that you can hear, Stephen? Great. Stephen, we'll just restart again. Good. We're just, Guy and I were just filling in terms of some of the impacts of the legal entities, be it accessing government funding, for example, or bringing on shareholders.
Great, and I apologize. I'm not sure what happened. I was in a different room and it cut out.
No, you're coming on really clearly now, so we'll hand it back to you,
So
Stephen.
Where had you heard me up until, just so I'm clear?
think you were talking about cultural outcomes and environmental outcomes. So why call it a social enterprise and call it an impact enterprise instead?
Okay.
And we were stuck in the dinner party. We'd only spoken to the person on our left at this point.
Perfect. Thank
That's
you very
right.
much.
Yes. Thanks, Bruce.
Yeah, I apologize for that. So you've talked to the person on your left and they're going to be setting up a charity, and you turn to the person on your right and they say, I'd like to set up a cafe and I'd like to employ people. We're going to serve good coffee, have wonderful cakes and that type of thing. Immediately your mind is thinking business. How are they going to get loans for this? Where are they going to get funding? Are there going to be shareholders, investors, that type of thing? So that then opens you up to different conversations if you're heading in that direction. So I guess often this comes about, you see, is that social enterprise in a way combines both of those things. The charity side is acting from the heart, wanting to have impact and do good in the world. And the business side is wanting to make it sustainable by having profit. And in a way, acting from matters of the mind, looking at balance sheets and how much is the funding. So social enterprise brings both of those elements, the heart of charity and the mind of business, and merges them and says, actually, we can do both. So the scenario that plays out is we could actually have a cafe which runs as a profitable business, and it employs this particular group which is in need. For example, people who've just gotten out of prison or are recovering from something where they are having difficulty finding employment. So that's the heart, I guess. So that's the scenario. And the reality is that we live in a paradigm, a binary way of thinking, where we've thought in the past that it's either you're a charity or you're a business. And so I think what we have now in terms of legal structures is that we're kind of caught because there's nothing that's really appropriate right in the middle. And that's what the paper in the chat that I mentioned from the Impact Initiative, that's what we go into. But for you all, looking at legal structures for social enterprise, I think I always look at where's the opportunity. So for me, it's the flip side of the coin between charity and business. And how can you harness the best of both of those, if possible? So what I'd like to do is just talk about each of them. But the key comes back to the Jerry Maguire movie, which had the quote, "Show me the money." So the first framing question to ask is, where do you think the source of funding is going to come from? Because if you're saying it's going to come from grants, it's going to come from donations, it's going to come from people giving to this, then we can already start to see that it's probably going to be down the charitable side as a legal structure, and that's fine. Like I said at the start, a social enterprise is more of a banner term to describe impact. But if you also say, well, actually, the money is going to come from selling things or providing services or doing things, then that's probably going to be more down the business side of things. So that's kind of an important thing. Obviously, where is your money coming from? Because that's going to probably determine which of those roads you want to start traveling down. The other question is, where is the money going to? So what I mean by that is, in your mind, as you come to set this up, are you intending that the profits or whatever it is going to go to a private individual, you as the shareholder? Or are you intending that it's going to go all back into the mission and the purpose? Because that's going to help us determine which road to go down, whether you're aiming sort of for a charitable structure or a, business for-profit structure. And this sounds kind of basic, but it's surprising how many people I talk to, and I ask these sorts of questions, and they haven't really thought through, where is the money coming from? Where is the money going to? They're more focused on the great idea that they've got, which I can understand. As an entrepreneur, that's your focus. But when it comes to legal structures, these things are quite important to get right. And yeah, so that's kind of a basic point. The other basic point, so money flow is number one. Number two is long-term plans. So what do you plan to do with this entity or this organization? Do you plan to be doing this for the next 10 years? Do you plan to sell it? Do you plan to have it continue beyond your involvement? And that's important because, again, if you go down the charity route, then there can't be private gain from the organization. And if you want to bring in investors or shareholders, then a charity is going to have difficulty doing that because you won't be able to issue shares to private individuals who will be able to gain from them. So this is really key, is to what is your long-term plan? And I know it's hard when you're starting out to think in that time frame, but I would encourage you to be thinking, it's 2030, here's what I want this to be. And the reason I mention this and highlight it is that we've had clients come to us who have poured blood, sweat, and tears into their organization because setting up anything is difficult. And at the end of 10 years, they can point to the community awards and all of the recognition and the amazing work that's gone on. But when they come to exit, because they chose a charitable structure, they are not able to benefit from selling their stake or selling the IP because it's bound up within the charity structure. So these are kind of, I'm spending time on it because these are important framing questions to then work out which option is going to be the one that you want to explore and pursue. And yeah, then I think if we've kind of looked at, okay, should it be a charity or should it be a not charity? Then the other natural question is, well, is there a way that we could access the benefits of both? And what I'm seeing increasingly is that people who have set up charities are saying, should I be setting up a company as well? And people who are setting up companies are saying, should I set up a charity as a way to access funding, as a way to get the benefits that both entity structures offer? And the answer is it depends. The circumstances are going to be different for everybody, but I'm certainly seeing people set up a second structure that is then able to access funding. So, for example, if you set up as a for-profit company, then you might be able to provide services and things, but not be able to access funding from Foundation North or Rata Foundation or one of the community trusts. So if a charity structure is set up parallel to the company, then as long as you have good conflicts of interest policies and mechanisms in place, then that can be a way to access funding that would not be available to the company. Yeah, so I'm happy to go into more detail on that, but I'm just trying to paint the big picture before we get into any questions that you've got. Yeah, so basically the other thing to mention is that social enterprise, like I said at the start, it's kind of this umbrella term. So I've seen other people set up incorporated societies, which is more maybe appropriate for like a democratic situation where you've got many people and they want to all be involved. You need more than 15 people to establish one of those. I've also seen people set up cooperative companies. So I think Lumio is a great example in New Zealand of a technology company, which if you go to their website, they describe themselves as a social enterprise, and they've certainly led the way in terms of here's another way of thinking about it. That structure is more where you have contributors to what you're doing. It came out of agricultural industry. So Fonterra is the biggest cooperative, actually the biggest entity in New Zealand, as far as I'm aware, and it has shareholders who supply milk. So that's a cooperative structure. So I'm just trying to paint the picture that there's options out there. And I've kind of touched on, cooperative companies, limited liability companies, trusts, incorporated societies. Yeah, there's a few different options.
Stephen, just asking there in terms of, could you set up both two entities, charitable trust and then say a limited liability registered company? Have you seen that, and how does that
Yeah,
function?
you can, and I've helped people set it up, and it definitely is possible. The key thing there is that you have to be careful that who's in control of the charitable trust, because if you and I set up a charity and it's the two of us as trustees, and we also set up a company and it's the two of us in the company, then we go and get funding for the charity, and you and I as the trustees decide that our company should be providing the services, then there's a clear conflict of interest there, because we're taking money that's coming in through the charitable structure and using it to benefit. So the private benefit isn't directly to us as the people who founded the charitable trust, it's to us in the company. So the key thing there is to have independent trustees. So, and that's actually a really positive thing. You can actually, therefore, if there was a decision to be made, it wouldn't be Guy and I who are making the decision about the funding and where the money is going. It would be, Jane and John, the independent trustees. And there's actually some really good guidance on Charities Services website about this very issue. And they even give an example of a conflicts policy. They talk about the wording to include in your charitable trust deed and that type of thing. So it's definitely possible, and I've seen it done, and I've helped clients on both sides do this. It comes back to my initial question is, what's your purpose and where's the money going to? Some people think that they need to sacrifice themselves on the altar of charity and never receive any personal benefit. And I truly admire that sentiment, but I don't think it's necessarily the way forward. I think it is possible to have some benefits that flow to the entrepreneurs. So that would be my answer to that. The other permutation on this is sometimes you'll see charities that own the companies. So that's another variation, if you like. And that's actually, IRD changed their policy. So now from 1st of April 2020, they want any companies which exist to benefit charities to also register as charities. What you put there for your purposes is that you are raising money for charity ABC. So it counts as a charitable purpose or charitable entity. So I've done that quite a lot too, setting up, charitable structures that are entirely charitable, where there's a trust that owns a company. And actually in New Zealand, if you look around, like one of the great examples is Kilmarnock down here in Christchurch. So they help people, I think they employ about 90 or 100 people in their factory now. And these are people who would have difficulty getting jobs, mainstream jobs, but they are, deconstructing televisions and computers and taking large, vast quantities of chocolate and packaging it into small containers, and all different jobs. And anyway, the point is, I'm getting to the point, they are a charitable trust, which owns a charitable company. So that type of thing is done as well. Yeah, the key, so can I just tell you, because I will forget this probably, the key thing in my mind is two parts. Number one, a social enterprise should be clear on what its mission is, and it should articulate what that is in its governing document. So if it's a company, it should be in the Constitution. If it's a charity, it's a bit easier because there will be a trust deed, and it should be clear about what its purpose is. And number two, it should commit to report on the impact that it wants to have in the world. So I think that's key, because we risk accusations of social washing and greenwashing if we simply articulate our mission is 1, 2, 3, but we never report on how we're actually doing. So I think it's a really vital thing. I want all of you to think about this is, number 1, articulating your mission and your purpose. Number 2, reporting on it clearly and in a timely way. And in my mind, that's what sets us apart, social enterprises, from other entities. Because bear in mind, in New Zealand, if you set up a company, you don't even have to say what your purpose is for the company. So you don't even have to have a constitution. So I think it's a huge oversight, and in the future, hopefully will be corrected and companies will be required to say what their mission and their purpose is. But for now, it's not actually a requirement. So that's why I think that's what distinguishes, in my mind, from a legal perspective, the social enterprises. The entrepreneurs have actually taken it to the next level, and they've actually said, here's our mission and our purpose, and here's how we report on it. Little Yellowbird's a good example of an entity which does really good reporting on, what they're aiming for. So there are people out there doing their best and trying to do this. The side note to all this is that in the future, I hope that we will have a legal structure that kind of sits between charity and company and addresses all the concerns and all the issues that I've been raising. And that report, the second one I put in, we kind of conclude that if government would recognize something called impact companies, then that would really help the sector to grow. Yeah.
Stephen, just pointing you to that question from Alison, that's just, I think it's a good part of this thread that we were talking about.
Sure, no problem.
But just,
yep. So,
Yep.
So again, charity is a blanket term. A charity can be a trust, or it can be a company, or it can be an incorporated society. The key thing is that it's registered with the government department called Charities Services. So their requirements to then register a charity under the Charities Act 2005, which is great reading if you feel like it. That act says that you need to articulate your purposes, and they have to advance charitable purposes. So a company, if it wanted to register as a charity, would need to have a constitution which clearly said which of the 4 charitable heads it was advancing. And just probably a reminder for some of you, but the charitable heads are advancing education, which is quite a broad one, it's quite a good one, reducing poverty, advancing religion, and purposes beneficial to the community. So those are the 4 charitable heads, which trace their way back to 1601. So it's been around for a long time, that conception of what is charity and what is not charity. So a charitable company needs to say in its constitution, what's the charitable purpose it is advancing? And also it needs to say somewhere that there's no private gain for individuals. So you can have a charitable company. If Guy and I set one up, we could be the shareholders, but the constitution would need to say that we can't privately benefit. In other words, we can't receive dividends. We can't receive the profit. Now that's contrasting to a charitable trust, which is where you have trustees, and that's the governing body. So you don't have directors, you have trustees of the trust, and you have the governing document is called the trust deed. And the trust deed has to do the exact same thing that I mentioned, advancing charitable purposes and being clear that there's no private gain for individuals. So I hope that helps to explain the difference.
Stephen, just you mentioned about the 2 areas, number 1, which is articulating mission, and then number 2, reporting on impact. Guy's made a really good comment / question there about articulating mission. Number 1 is relatively easy, but an impact reporting less so. So can you just talk about that in terms of what's good? What does good look like?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. And I think this is the real point that we need to focus on in the future, is how do we measure the impact? How do we report on it? This is a conversation that is happening at all levels of conversation when it comes to impact. So you see it as well with impact investing and people who are investing their funds and wanting reports on the impact. The difficulty is that it's hard to measure some of the impacts that we all want to have. So it's difficult to point and say, well, there was, you know, $10,532 of impact. Because if you take my scenario earlier where you've got a cafe which is helping a certain type of people who wouldn't have jobs otherwise, how do you measure the impact on their coming to work regularly, able to afford a house to live in, you know, the stability to the family, the children who then go to school who weren't going to school? Like, it's really difficult. But Guy, you're absolutely right. This is the nut that we have to crack, is how do we measure it? How do we report on it? And how do we compare apples and oranges? So if there's a social enterprise which is all about the marine environment and reduction of plastics, that type of thing, how do you compare that with Kilmarnock, who are helping people into employment, or Pathway Charitable Trust, which helps people exit coming out of prison? You know, it's really a difficult question, but it's absolutely the right one to ask. And I would love to see, I'd be happy to write a white paper with anybody who's willing to, because I think we need to talk about it more. How do we measure it? How do we report on it? I think we need to hold up the good examples that we do see in the market and learn from what they're doing. It's difficult, but that's my answer. I'll stay with it.
Are there other examples? You mentioned Little Yellow Bird there, Stephen. Were other examples that you've just seen that the reporting's been really good?
Yeah, I mean, if you go overseas as well, like, I think it's important not to just focus here in our own country. So there are other, because we have to remember social enterprise, like I said at the start, is this banner term. And there's a lot going on in Europe, in Scotland, in the UK. There's a lot going on in Canada. I mean, this conversation here is part of the Social Enterprise World Forum. And I know there's conversations happening and there's good best practice emerging. If it's possible to, yeah, I'd actually be curious for some of your perspectives. Have you all seen good examples of people who are reporting? The people I know about, like Kilmarnock, are doing a really good job, I think. Pathway Charitable Trust, I think they're doing a good job in how they report on impact. Yeah, Eat My Lunch is an interesting example. I think they do a good job of reporting on their impact. There's a lot of people within the Impact Initiative cohort who've gotten the Impact Readiness grants through Akina, who are doing a good job. The report that I mentioned, the 25 people, 25 entities that we talked to, they're all doing really well. Yeah, I'd be curious if other people have some ideas of people that they look up to. Yeah. Should I have a look at any other questions here?
Yeah, sure, Stephen.
Yeah.
Perhaps, Stephen, as you're looking and thinking, another factor that I've noticed with many social enterprises is it really, in this idea of legal structures, it depends on which pathway people take into social enterprise. People, it seems like people either come from the social service, the sort of the nonprofit world, the social impact world, or they come from the business world into it. And they come into it kind of for very different reasons to meet in the middle. And so people that come from the social sector almost always want to register as a charity, obviously, because somehow that feels more virtuous to them. And the whole idea of making profit, you know, and being a commercial entity is actually distasteful to many. And so somehow that would corrupt their purpose. So they wind up creating sort of enterprising nonprofits, you know, like they do trade, you know, but they just don't distribute the profits to owners or able to sell it. Whereas it's quite the opposite. People that will come to it from the business world and say, no, I have a conscience. I want to do something significant. they will almost always register as a for-profit because, of course, for them, that's virtuous, and they don't understand the social side. So I mean, it's very interesting to see how people come to it from these different perspectives.
I agree with you, Bruce. And I think you've made a really good point, which is what's your background? Hopefully this type of a call and discussion will help people think about their own conceptions and
Right.
what they bring to the table before they make a decision, which is one of the reasons I wanted to do this, is to just make it clear that social enterprise is this umbrella term, but there's many options within that. And it really does come back to where's the money coming from, what's going to happen to it, what's our purpose, how long do we want to go for, what happens next, who's going to take it over. You know, all these things play into it. And it's important not to come, the reason I gave the dinner party illustration at the start is that you do have a certain paradigm of thinking, which is, oh, you want to help people, you must be a charity. Oh, you want to make money, you must be a business. And what we're trying to break down is actually we can come in the middle and have a bit of both. But that paradigm of thinking of binary, you're either this or that, is very, very strong because we are the fish in the water and we don't know the water is around us. So it's about helping people unlock that there's many options, there's many things to think about, and don't just make assumptions based on your own background, I guess.
I would add just one more final thing, which is there's also an element of signaling beyond where the money will come from or what will happen eventually with this organization, you hope. But it's what do you want to signal to both stakeholders inside the organization and outside. And so one social enterprise that I've worked with intentionally registered as a company because they wanted to signal to both the people working inside as well as to those that they were trading with, the general public, that we are a legitimate business. And we want you to see us as a business and not as the stereotypical charity. So, I mean, and yet they don't have any plans of making a lot of money or selling their shares to a big investor in the future. For them, it was the signaling value that was the most important in that decision.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think this comes back to my point about the two key things that set social enterprises apart. And one of them is articulating your mission and your purpose and being clear about it. And certainly when I'm working with people, I have a template or a constitution that I've used with a lot of people. And number one says, we are a social enterprise. We are about more than profit. Number two, our mission is, and then we write it and we're clear about it. It's articulated right at the beginning. And for those of you in Auckland, if you've been to Morningside, there's a cafe there called Crave Cafe. And nearby it is a new cafe called Kind Cafe. And Kind, if you go onto company's office, type in Kind, and it should come up. And that's an example of a template or a constitution that we developed with them, where they're very clear about what our mission and our purpose is. And we also in that borrowed and looked at what's going on in the US around social benefit companies. And so social benefit companies also have a next clause, which I put in the Kind one, which says we also consider the environment, the employees, our suppliers, our customers, so it's much broader thinking than simply how much money can we make. But I think this is really key and important. And if you take nothing else away, my hope is that people listening would realize that setting up the legal structuring side, there's many options, but what sets a social enterprise apart is being really clear on the mission and purpose and enshrining it within your legal documents and then reporting on it. And I see guys made a point there about at least trying to report and the impact models and impact measurement systems having something in place. I think as well, Jackson Rowland has sent me before, there's like a one-page template of impact, which is a really good, helpful way to think about what you want to do with the organization. So that's another thing that I've seen, which is a useful tool. Hannah, are there any other specific questions you want me to cover there?
No, I couldn't see anything else there and to flag to you, Stephen. But if I'll open up to the audience, or otherwise you can keep going with some other themes there, Stephen.
Yeah, well, the only other theme I would say is, in my mind, it does come back to purpose and impact. And right now I'm in the process of writing a white paper about another option, which is a stewardship trust. So this would be like a private trust, which owns the shares of a company and holds the shares as a steward. So thinking really long term. And this has been done over in the States, in particular in Oregon, where they have a company there, which is an organic food company. But it's a really exciting development to see them trying these new ways of framing stewardship. So I'm quite keen, because obviously here in Aotearoa, as you all will be aware, we've got this incredible wealth within Te Ao Māori. And if you look at the concepts of kaitiakitanga, thinking beyond our own lifetimes, I think there's huge amounts of, there's just so much depth there that we have, which not all countries, not all cultures would necessarily have. So I'm really excited to see where that goes and how we can tap into that more in a really constructive, regenerative way, not in a tokenistic, copy paste this term that I don't really understand way. I hope I'm being clear about that. I'm just going to put a link to a spin-off article I did a little bit ago about that concept of Te Ao Māori as well, and social enterprise.
Stephen, I've asked a few questions, so I just want to give other people the opportunity. But if there aren't any other questions, I've got another one. But I'll wait just to see if anyone else has got.
Sure. I'm just pasting in this other article as well. The other exciting thing is that there is a lot happening around the world. So that's the article. There's a lot happening around the world in terms of developments. So in the UK, you've got the Community Interest Company, which is a new way of doing things. And they, from what I can tell, they're getting lots more people registering using that. And in Australia, they're looking, I don't know if it will come through, but they're looking at some sort of social benefit corporation or company. And, you know, if you look around the world, there's a lot going on in this sector. Something that may or may not be on your radars is something called the fourth sector as well, which is an attempt to talk about impact-driven entrepreneurs and purpose-driven people beyond the traditional three sectors of private sector, government, and charity, and saying there's a fourth sector, which is about purpose and impact. So yeah, I might find the link for that as well, because it's quite interesting. Personally, I have a few issues with labels and terms, and I don't want to adopt a label, a little bit like what I explained about social enterprise. I don't want it to become the fourth sector that's what they do, because I think it's really important to normalize conversations about purpose and impact, because this is something that all businesses, all organizations should be doing and thinking about. So we have to be careful with labels. They can be powerful, but we don't want companies and people saying, well, those people over there, the ones attending the Social Enterprise World Forum, they're concerned about that. Whereas we're over here, we don't need to talk about principles and kaitiakitanga and that type of thing. So I'll just paste this fourth sector link in as well. In terms of the template, are you meaning the Akina, the one-page one? Is that somebody asked about that? Yeah.
Yeah, listeners asked about that, Stephen.
Yeah.
I've been trying to actually look during the conversation on the Impact Initiative website, because I know there was a suite of resources on there. It seems to a little bit. The Impact Initiative.
I'm not sure if it's like a accessible PDF or not. I have a copy of the PDF. If anybody wants it, email me. If you Google me, you can find my email. I'll type it in the thing. And I'm happy to circulate it, because I do send that to people. Basically, it's a one-page summary of what you're doing, who's involved, who are you trying to impact. You know, it's just a helpful framing of the conversation.
So just included, I think Stephen had just Impact Initiative. I know there was a part there that you could have templates, because I know that I worked on one in collaboration with Akina about an intro to investment for social enterprises, but it seems to have moved around a little bit.
Yeah.
So,
well, can I just encourage
maybe if you just explore that a little bit more.
This is a huge plug, but I believe it, in that I know Akina had a brand new part of their website, and it's got some amazing resources. And I think even this recording will go up as one of them in the future. And I get lots of people contacting me, and I usually go have a look there. There's a lot of great resources, and these are people who've been doing this for years now. They know the landscape. It's such a vital part of our ecosystem. So make sure you explore that fully, because
there is a lot of resources. You're absolutely right, Stephen. I just wonder if you perhaps you could ask your question if it's still relevant, and we could probably wrap up the session from there.
Sure. I think Stephen was just touching on it actually, which is really this idea of a separate legal entity for a social enterprise, and what he thinks about that, and what the state of play in New Zealand is, and what the pros and cons are. So there's a lot in that, but if you were able to give us a very good summary, quick summary.
Yeah, well, so with this report that I put at the beginning, as you'd know, Guy, like we talked about what we thought was the way forward, which was a tweaking of the company's legislation rather than a brand new act or a brand new legal entity. We thought you could probably achieve what we all want by tweaking what we have. And we thought that would be a more easier rather than saying we need completely new legislation. Instead, if we were able to amend it so that you did have to articulate your purpose and your mission in your constitution, and you did have to report on that purpose and mission, like it's not rocket science, it's not that, that's it pretty much, then that would be a way to then articulate for this particular class of company that they meet the criteria to then be registered as an impact company, or whatever the term ended up being. But what we're really hoping is to have some dialogue with government and with people of influence to be able to come to a joint solution, because I think what we've seen in other jurisdictions and places, it's not very effective just to say, here's what we should adopt. It has to be a conversation. And then the one fear I have, I guess, is this fear that it becomes something that those people do. So anytime there's a label or a different category, to what extent, I want to normalize the conversation about impact and purpose. I want this to be something that every company cares about, that their employees are treated well. This shouldn't be a strange concept. This should be normal business. So I guess we just have to be mindful of that, and we don't want to risk alienating all businesses from being willing to adopt this way of thinking by having a separate category. So that would be my caution. Yeah. The last thing I'd just say is that I have been doing this podcast. I started it to be able to tell social enterprises stories. I've talked with 213 people, so that's a lot of content if you're interested. It's now been listened to more than 80,000 times across all those stories. It's not every week a social enterprise, because I think I would get bored if it was just a social enterprise every week. So it jumps. So some weeks I'll talk with someone who sets up a charity. I've talked with a 6-year-old. I've talked with a nun who was 92 years old and was born in 1928 about her life. like I'm willing to talk with people about their journeys and where they're going and why they do what they do. So just to give a flavor, Margaret Austin was an MP from 1984 to 1996. She was also born in 1933. So we start the interview talking about her memories of World War II. So that's not social enterprise, but it's pretty interesting. And so the podcast is, it's out there. I'm recording interviews with amazing people. Have a look. It's called Seeds. It's in all podcasting apps. That's my little plug for that. I'm really enjoying it. I'm going to keep doing it. Yeah. And I do, there's all kinds of resources that are free, including that book I put up as a link. And if any of you would like to reach out, I'm happy to have a no charge conversation. I time it so that I do it when I'm driving home. I live in Rolliston, so I've got a 25-minute drive, and I just set up calls with people, having conversations, hopefully pointing them in the direction that will help them. If you at some point chose to use us to provide actual legal services, then would set people up as clients. But I just want to make sure you know that I'm accessible. I want the sector to grow. I actually do care about what you all are trying to achieve, and hopefully wear that on my sleeve as a distinctive as a lawyer. So yeah, but thanks very much for the chance to speak, and I'm sorry about the technical difficulties at the start.
No, not at all. That's very minor compared to the knowledge that you've transferred across, Stephen. It's a very great comment to actually sentiment to end on, because Stephen thinks very much about the long term. He's been doing this for a long time. I think that's very generous and genuine there, that offer. So Stephen's we've provided you with a host of stuff. So perhaps if you just feel free in the next few minutes, I'll leave the meeting room open just to copy some of those that are relevant to you. Thank you very much again, Stephen, for your time. Definitely a good reaction from me too. I'll put my hand.
Oh, great.
I
hope it was helpful. I know there's a lot of content there, but yeah, my parting word would be go for it. Keep going on your journey. I'm sure, there's lots of ideas there, and keep pushing for getting the right legal structure.